Okay, hello. How did it go since last time?
Okay. Sorry, you already just said since last time.
Oh, how did it go?
Well, I mean, on the whole, not fantastic in that I didn't really, um, you know, things haven't changed that much, but they feel like I feel much better today. Um,
Well,
the
that's good.
Yeah. So I did spend a bit of time this morning mapping out. I thought the difference between the two was sort of thing, but like wanted to at least sort of because I've thought a bunch about like why sort of thing, or like tried to observe why and stuff like that over the past few days. And I feel like there's a bit of an explanation sort of coming together a bit more that's in line with sort of what I've thought in the past, but is a bit more explicit now, which is nice. Um, I mean, yeah, so anyway, so I wanted to map that out and think about like what are the actual things. And so I feel like the big bits are the important stuff are all at the top there. Um, this one I sort of it's been there for a long time, but I don't think I like as in deserving it, deserving a break. I don't think I didn't explicitly put it down till quite late in that process. Um, but yeah, but I think it probably does have a lot to do with like rest and stuff like that. Um,
Okay. Do you want to give me a screenshot of that?
yeah, it's a good idea. Whoops, this is actually on the it's on the same page as the last one thing. But I'll see if I can get a. Here we go. So the section in the bottom left, the what do I dislike? I sort of was like a little bit more general there than just talking about these periods because I like there's stuff that I dislike in the periods, but it's like as in this sort of like binging behavior is not uh like it's not something that like I the games I choose are different from the games that I would normally choose. Um they're all games I like, but I might play them under other circumstances, but they're sort of I don't know, there's something a bit more particular about them usually. The other stuff that I sort of realized, so it's not like there is always an element of like choosing my own goals as well, as opposed to just following a um like a set list of goals that is entirely chosen for you. Um, so even with like Fallout 4 is probably one of the more linear things that I've mentioned here. Um, but I usually like take goals into it, um, and that sort of has this interaction with this idea of like finishing it till it's done. Like a lot of that, it feels like on topic with some of the stuff we were talking about the other day about um, like
Yep.
sense of achievement and things. Um, yeah. Um,
Okay, so the first thing I noticed looking at the dislikes, uh, well, first thing is there aren't that many. You brainstormed a lot more for what you like about them. Second thing with the
yeah.
dislikes is none of them are concrete problems that screw up your life. They're all just sort of like not ideal in some way, but none of them have like a clear and present major danger. Like they're all things you could sort of live with and it wouldn't really be bad necessarily.
Well, arguably, I've been living with this problem for some time, and it hasn't been that bad. So um, it's definitely disruptive at the time. But yeah, it's I don't feel like it's that I'm actually at risk, sort of thing. It's not like I'm spending thousands of dollars via microtransactions or anything
Right,
else.
that's right. If it makes you poor, that is a thing that connects to your other goals. Um, uh, demo pro. So these are not clearly connected to any negative impact on other goals you have in your life. Arbitrary and disconnected from real life, both are just separation. It's not achieving some other goals, but it isn't harming them either.
Mhm.
Resistance to putting it down is more unclear. Um, just taken like directly and literally, it doesn't harm other goals. It's just a separate thing. But it's sort of between the lines, maybe. You think you should get back to your other goals, but you resist putting it down, so then it actually disrupts them. So it could be
That,
related.
yeah, that's part of the like that increases. So there's sort of like tension that increases in terms of I become less and less happy by not doing the things that I feel like are important, um, which is very low at the start. Usually because I feel like I either have been doing that or something like that. But then that sort of dishappiness increases as like some other things sort of decrease. Um, so because that eventually gets to a point where I'm like not willing to continue like playing the games or whatever because I just feel like it's so counterproductive or counter my um yeah, I don't know, yeah, goals.
Yeah, so with arbitrary, I think it's bad if your whole life is arbitrary or if, say, 80% of your life is arbitrary. But I think it's completely fine if you spend, say, a quarter of your life doing arbitrary puzzles. Um, I don't see the harm. Like, you don't have to always be doing things with a non-arbitrary purpose. Like, you can form your own goals, and if they're not causing trouble, it's okay. So, like, I don't think it's inherently bad to play chess, even though that's arbitrary in a lot of ways.
Yeah, okay.
Like, a
So,
lot of things people do are, someone asks you a riddle, that's kind of arbitrary. They just made up some sort of puzzle, but that's not
well,
necessarily a bad thing.
like I mean, arbitrary is a weird thing to put there without any context anyway. Like Conway's Game of Life is arbitrary, but it's led to like mathematical innovations that wouldn't have happened otherwise, and it's gotten people into doing certain things like, you know, learning basic programming or stuff like that that they wouldn't have done otherwise. So like arbitrariness is definitely not. I think the second thing at the bottom there is probably more what I like. It's that sort of arbitrariness in terms of um, like playing WoW. I usually get to a point where it's just like this just feels like grind for grind's sake. I'm not going to do it anymore, sort of thing. And then I just completely ignore it after that, even if I've sunk, like a week into it at this point. Um, uh, Often that happens like after achieving something, um, and then it's like, okay, what's the next goal? And it's like, why bother setting a next goal? Something like that. But arbitrariness is, in general, it's not like that bad a thing, and a lot of the time that's what makes games fun. In that, like the stuff like they are disconnected and they are like arbitrary. Someone's gone and chosen some stuff. Um, I don't know. I mean, maybe that makes them not arbitrary in different ways, um,
Yeah, they're not
but yeah,
100% arbitrary. Like WoW has a physics system that is kind of like real life, where you can move around and have a position in 3D space, and you can jump and so on.
yep,
So there's
yeah.
certainly similarities to real life, even with more abstract things that people actually bring up or ask about. You could usually form some sort of connection to a real situation.
So one thing I did notice about the dislike about games, so I didn't put in those periods like I did for the other topic because uh, I sort of didn't feel like there's a lot that I dislike in that period in terms of what I choose to do. Um, so I sort of made it a bit more general because I don't choose to play many games most of the time. Um, like it's rare that I'll actually stick with a game outside of these periods, which is sort of interesting. Um, but I think it's a lot of it is just simply feeling like I don't have the time. Um, like I was playing Doom Eternal recently, and then it sort of surprised me that I hadn't touched the game for like 2 weeks. And it wasn't that I didn't want to go back to it, it's just that I didn't feel like I had the time or that at any of the times that I might have had that I was in the mood. Um, so it's sort of what that actually makes me think about more is like a lack of moderating it in the way that it's distributed, sort of thing. So instead of like, right now it's say, I don't know, 2 months out of the year are spent in that sort of state, give or take, and as opposed to also 2 months of the year being spent like that, but just spread out much more evenly, as opposed to, you know, one or two big clumps.
Okay, so I wrote a few notes. I think some of the problems you have with games are not inherent in the game themselves. They're the way you're using it, e.g. binging. Um, what all of these are getting at in some way, I think, is that it's taking away time from other projects. Like the downside is you're not doing something else. And when you say it's arbitrary or disconnected from real life, I think what that means is you don't have a goal for the game playing that seems more important to you than the projects you're setting aside. Like you can't look at the game playing and be like, I'm accomplishing something way better here, so it's fine to set those aside. You're looking at it and questioning the value of it compared to the things you're setting aside.
I
So
think that's
this partly
supported.
sounds like, yeah, go ahead.
I think it's supported by, like, I've got, you know, the first thing that I wrote down for what do I like doing or like about games in these periods is avoid thinking about real life in general. And then what do I dislike is disconnected from real life. Like, um, it makes a lot more sense in that uh, most of the time, even a small amount of time spending on it feels wrong. But in these periods, because I've just like totally rejected that sort of the idea of doing those other things at that period of time. So it's fine. And that's a reason to do it because it isn't. Yeah. Anyway, so I think that's yeah, pretty right.
Yeah, so one thing to think about is your overall goal. Like, is no games the correct goal? Should you shoot for that and try to figure out how to do that and be happy with it? Or is it something else, like playing it in downtime only, so that it's not disrupting other things, like making it a secondary activity that fits in the gaps, for example?
Yeah.
And, you know,
Oh yeah.
do you have like an aspiration to a lifestyle where you would keep playing games on a regular basis and it fits in with everything else without them interfering with each other?
So not particularly. Um, like there's nothing like if I was, I don't know, really good at Hearthstone or something and whatever and was trying to become a streamer and make that my primary income, then maybe that sort of thing would like, I don't know, be a lot more important. But it's like games themselves aren't that interesting. Like I don't feel any strong need to play games in the same way that I don't feel any strong need to read like any particular sort of fiction. Um, and that sometimes I do it because I enjoy it, but it's not like that's actually a primary goal in and of itself. They're all there to facilitate something else. Um, which a lot of the time might be like, you know, stories are enjoyable, but like downtime or something like that, doing that effectively. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
so one of the ways that they can integrate into a life in a non-disruptive way is in relation to daily currency budgets, because time is not the bottleneck on doing philosophy. So you have to find some things to do that are easier than philosophy or like difficult programming that you like to do and get some value out of. Things that use more time and less mental energy rather than vice versa.
yeah,
So if it's
yeah.
not games, you have to pick other things that have some of that aspect to them. Do you think you have other things like that that you value a lot, or are most of your main goals like all really hard and draining?
No, most of the main goals are like that. Like, I mean, the only exceptions are so occasionally I'll have particular goals around like an interim sort of activity. Um, like Hearthstone was primarily a way to spend time on a commute for me before. Um, and I stopped playing it entirely, like from mid-March onwards. Um, not for any particular reason, but this is like, you know, breaking a 3, 4 year habit sort of thing. Um, yeah, so I think like when I think about goals, like the stuff that comes to mind is essentially all wrapped up in like big vision stuff. Um, And even the stuff that's
So
like different projects and things are different arms of that in some way.
so hard stuff basically, draining.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. So yeah, to organize your life in a stable long-term pattern, you have to mix together hard things and less hard things. Because the hard things run you out of mental energy faster than they run you out of time. So if you try to do them in every hour of the day, you will get exhausted.
yeah. It's definitely my experience.
Right, so I think games, they fit that as something that's less draining per time spent.
Yeah,
And there are certainly many other things in life that can fit that, like going for a walk or watching a TV show or cooking.
yeah. So
So
I
it's,
have, oh, I have done TV shows before as the same sort of thing. Um, Game of Thrones was the most recent one. It was like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago.
yeah, so it's important to figure out some of those that you like to do and, mix them into your day on pretty much a daily basis generally works the best to do some harder things and some easier things every day.
Yeah. So I feel like as well, I mean the daily budgets idea. So I feel like there's like a daily budgets and then there's a weird like bank credit system that operates with really unintuitive rules. Um,
Yes, there's
like
definitely extra complexity.
um, yeah, like one of the things that I noted was uh like I can't remember exactly where I put it, but like I can focus on like a video game for a lot longer than like even like so I can stay focused on it past 24 hours quite easily, sort of thing. As in just like sit down one morning and then just keep playing and avoid sleeping, and eventually it's like 5 a.m. and the sun's coming up, so it's easy to stay awake again. Um, like that sort of thing. Um, which means that it is like pretty much less than like a daily budget. Um, but it
Yes, so if you
also
play, go ahead.
it's also like really like it's different to like if I was like if so say um like in March after like not working on a project and sort of having a lot of like internal tensions with things and whatever else, like corporate overhead. Um, like the I basically spent the next month playing Age of Empires 2. And I didn't know how to really play it beforehand, so there was a lot of learning and stuff. I've still got a whole bunch of spreadsheets and things that I made up, like pinned up behind my monitor as quick reference stuff. Um, like I spent a lot of time focusing on getting better. Um, and like the results that I got sort of showed that. Um, that's curious because I was ready to spend a whole bunch of time learning new things, but not to spend time on a whole bunch of other stuff. I didn't want to work on like Flux was still tiresome. Um, uh, like because that's a lot of people and admin and stuff like that. And coding was still tiresome. But this other thing, like, you know, learning Age of Empires 2 was not, which is sort of curious in that it's like learning isn't even like one budget. There's like must be, or at least different things that go into that.
Yeah,
Um,
so
so
a
anyway,
lot of this is how you feel about things. Like if there's something you dislike about it, that's a big factor besides the having the resource budget available. The
mm,
Probably why Age of Empires worked is you weren't stuck in some way. So a lot of times what people do with projects is at the beginning, they're not stuck, everything goes smoothly, and they keep making progress, and it seems easy and fun because of the rapid progress. So it's like efficient. And then at some
Yeah.
point, they start to get stuck on some things, and then it becomes less fun and more of a drag, and so on. And projects you've had a long time in your life already have some parts that are not going well that you're stuck on in some way. And you're not totally stuck, so you can work on them, but that can get tiring. So then you want like a fresh project where you're not stuck in any major way at the moment, so you can make more rapid progress.
Yeah. It occurs to me as well, it's not even like with the Age of Empires 2 thing, there was no pioneering even to do, like in any component of it. Like some of this, like with Flux or with other projects or things, there's some parts of it are like we don't know how to solve the problem and there's no one we know that we can go ask. Um, and other parts are like, well, there's a whole bunch of other ideas and we've got to figure out what works or try different things or whatever else. With AoE 2, it was like not even that. It's like basic stuff. There's lots of different, build orders and stuff that people have produced. So there was no hard work associated with the learning. Um, the
Yeah,
hardest thing was just choosing what to do and then just trying to do the same thing over and over again, um, which sort of made it, yeah. Um, and then come to think of it, it
yeah,
probably was around the point where it started to get a bit harder, like mixing and matching lots of different skills as opposed to just trying to practice one thing over and over again, um, where I lost interest.
yeah. That's very common that people take up new projects and then stop when it gets hard, which is the part where error correction has to happen. Yeah, with Age of Empires, it's success is a lot more predictable because you're not breaking new ground. So you can get success on a regular basis, predictably, until you get stuck. But because you're not having to invent new things, which has a indeterminate time span.
Yep.
Whereas if you go
Yep.
work on a flux problem, you don't know when you will get a reward from that work.
No, well, and even a lot of the problems don't feel like they're the rewarding problems. Like they're so um, we have so an example is we've got this thing in our constitution that says that we need to change the rules around leadership. Right now, it's just benevolent dictator for 5 years essentially, but that needs to like change before 5 years, like from the date of registration, which is next March. Um, so we're starting to think about that and what to do there. And it's not like there's no particularly hard problems in that we're just decentralizing things slightly because, you know, for various reasons. But so the changes are small. It's just writing like an amendment, a newsletter, whatever. Um, Nothing is like actually a hard problem. It's just unrewarding because there's no real payoff. Like, and there's a lot of those sort of things that I feel like in that they're things that need to be done, but the payoff is not having bigger problems as opposed to feeling like it's actively moving you forward.
Yeah, well, when you signed up for that in the first place, like when you wrote that you will deal with it in 5 years, there must have been like an important reason. So you're trying to get that reward. But I guess maybe that happened in the past and now you're paying for it later.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I feel like both are true. There was no like defined thing to do next, but essentially just being a young political party in Australia, like there's plenty of stories of them being imploded or imploding or having people co-opt them or whatever else. And so we just wanted to avoid that. So we'll have another similar clause in the next version. It'll just have another horizon. Um, but yeah, the reason is basically so that we don't stick with it for too long. Um, so that it's not, so that it's obvious that this is only temporary. Um, and that we're forced to eventually make some kind of improvement. But um, yeah, but essentially it feels like busy work now. Um,
Right. Okay, so backing up a little, video games, as a loose approximation, use up two time and one energy. Like 2 hours uses one energy unit, whereas philosophy
yeah,
is like three energy and one time. So if you play video games all day, you're wasting half of your energy budget. Whereas if you try to do philosophy all day, you get tired after like 6 hours
Yep.
and run out of energy, and you still have a bunch of time left. Whereas if you mix them, you can make the day come out. So in this case, we would need, let's see, if we did 4 philosophy, that would use 12, and then we would have 6 of these. So we're a little off, maybe 3 philosophy.
Yeah, I don't think the ratio works out cleanly. Um,
Yeah,
but
so around
uh,
3 or 4 philosophy, and the rest video games.
yep. Um, yeah, somewhere between that. So yeah, and that's sort of the thing. I guess one of the problems that I've run into then, like, is these ratios don't feel too terrible to sort of use, for illustrative purposes. So like on the days where we do this, it's 2 hours, and usually that feels like it's usually pretty mentally similar to like trying to write or things like that. Um,
Yep.
so that's nearly the entire budget there, sort of thing. Um, and so I feel like because I'm unhappy about that to some extent, I try to overextend, and I still have budget at that point. Like I feel like I can keep going, sort of thing. Um, so I need to maybe be a bit more conscious about that and try to break it up a bit more. Sometimes I do philosophy stuff at night, but yeah, but I think that's just a being conscious of it type thing.
Yeah, so similar to how there's easy coding projects, it's possible to work on philosophy and make progress in easier ways. So it's not just, go hard on philosophy, then get tired, and then do easier stuff for the rest of the day. You can try to find other options like middle ground. So philosophy is harder when you're trying to think highly creatively and focus a lot and go fast and deal with like novel problems where you have no idea what you're doing. But then there's other steps that are a bit easier, like editing is commonly easier than writing because you're not trying to come up with what to say. You're just dealing with little details.
Yep.
The abstract picture is when you're near the edge of your abilities, it's harder. And if you back off from that, it's easier. So, for example, if the very maximum speed I could type is 150 words per minute, that's going to take like all of my focus. But if I back off to half of that, it's easy. Same thing with like listening speed or reading speed. If you go to like half of your maximum, it's not very hard anymore.
Yep. Yeah.
And
Um,
then it happens with, go ahead.
I was going to say one thing that so I was thinking about this the other day for other reasons, but like with so I usually have so I suspect there's a lot of things like this in terms of like speed reading sort of thing. When I try and read things quickly, um, then I read not just a little bit faster, but much faster. But I can't do halfway in between. Like I can read slow and whatever. And anyway, that sort of indicates that I'm using a different technique, or there's some new element that is like either there or not. It's not a gradient type thing. Um, anyway, maybe there's like analogies I can pull out for
Yeah,
the ways that I'm doing things.
I have a decent amount of middle ground that works pretty well, but there are some discontinuities that exist. One of them is something like, are you suppressing side thoughts and just really focusing? So if I set it really fast, it helps with actually not getting bored or losing focus. Like there's some speeds where, yeah, I start to get bored and then it's hard to focus because the words are coming too slowly. So if like regular reading is self-paced, but then when it's controlling the pace, you need it to go fast enough to like keep you busy.
Yep.
Because it's hard to go off on your own thoughts and your tangents without pausing. because the words keep coming. So if you're
Mm.
not keeping yourself entertained via tangents and thinking about implications, then you need the information to be coming in fast enough.
Yep, yep.
But what I find is the tireder I am, then the slower speed is fast enough.
Yep, yep. No, I agree. Um, yeah, that's one thing about games actually is so I've sort of got this idea about focus in there, but with very low attention, they can provide lots and lots and lots of stimulus. Um, like it's not like words where you have a concentrated and encoded sort of thing. Um, it's, you get lots of visual stuff, you get lots of audio cues, you get, there's plenty of stuff to like throw out on autopilot or to occupy your brain on autopilot as opposed um, to avoid, all the side thoughts and stuff.
So the learning stages also help see resource usage. So being able to do something once correctly at all is usually on the harder side, and then getting from there to being able to do it more often and figuring out how it works is more medium, and then practicing it a bunch until it becomes more automatic is often easier and takes more time per effort expended because you just have to like try it a bunch and get used to it and look for error patterns over larger data sets. Like at the beginning, you're looking for errors on single attempts, but in later practice, you'll do, 10 attempts or 100 attempts and look for are there patterns of errors that are worth fixing to increase my success rate.
Yeah,
So
yep.
that takes more time because you need the larger data sets.
So, um, it feels like we've talked about a bunch of relevant stuff just at the moment. So the things that occur to me, in terms of the tutorials we're doing, feels like there's a bit of an element of like we're particularly with like some of the grammar stuff, we're getting into a lot more three territory than one, whereas at the beginning there was more one. Um,
Uh-huh.
and when things are like easier, there's like you have all the, spare brain capacity doing other things or thinking about, should I do this instead? It's more important or whatever else. Um, and so you sort of get a thing there where uh like I feel like one of the reasons I don't enjoy like practicing grammar stuff too much is that uh yeah, there's um basically it's like listening to words that are coming too slow, sort of thing. And I feel like when I'm just doing that practice that there's a lot of other bits of the brain that are like wanting more stuff to come in. Um
Yeah, so the point is you can do it when you're tired, or you can do harder things, and then you could do grammar practice instead of some of the video game time, and it wouldn't be too draining.
yeah, I haven't tried that, I think. Um I'm just trying to think. There is like lower capacity or easier stuff that I've done at night plenty, that's fine. But I haven't actually tried doing exercises and things that I would otherwise find boring. But that's probably a thing I should remember next time.
Yeah, I think that would help. So the goal is to figure out ways to make progress on your major goals during lower energy time. So if you could roughly divide your day into three parts. So it's like one section of the day you're doing hard stuff, one section you're doing the same goals but more efficiently. And then the third section, whatever, video games, socializing.
Yep.
And I think if you do it like this, you're going to mind the video games a lot less because you had two major making progress events per day instead of one.
Mm.
You'll be making progress faster, so it'll be more satisfying, and the video game time will take up less of your time, so it'll seem like less of a problem and more of an acceptable break.
The the other thing, so there is one example I can think of where I took like much longer than I usually would to play something because I didn't binge on it. And that was like a year ago or something. I played Final Fantasy VI. Um, or sorry, not six. Is it six? Yeah, the last one on the SNES. Um, anyway, and that was far more like that in that I had like work stuff, I would do other stuff, and then I would like look forward to playing it, which I usually don't do like with games. Like, um, it's sort of either I, have these really intense moments where I look forward to doing that and nothing else, or I don't really look forward to it much, like in any other period. Um, but I did in this case. Like it just strikes me that it might be a good thing that I need to think about in terms of why did that work out much better than normal.
Yeah, I play games that way sometimes. Just after everything else is done, if I have some spare time in the evening.
Yeah. Anyway, I think dividing the day is good. I did try and plan some days, like when I was actually like journaling and doing it. Oh wow, so the last entry, well, it was just a date. That was on the 14th, and I didn't end up writing anything for it. I'm sort of surprised at. But yeah, I sort of like wrote out a few times like to the plan for tomorrow. And it never ended up going to plan. Um, I wonder if
Hmm.
that's sort of like part of it. Um,
Yeah, if you work on that kind of thing a lot, you can get better at predicting yourself and what you'll actually do or what'll work.
yeah.
It also
You
partly
also,
relates to the projects you're working on and how predictable they are.
yep. Um, I don't think like project-wise, I don't think things are too unpredictable. At least maybe the exact content of work, but not the type or um, particular nature sort of thing. In that I know that I have, a backlog of paperwork to do with Flux, and there's a backlog of coding. I know all those sort of things. Sometimes things come up, but they're not. It's not that frequent. Yeah. So I feel like if I actually divide the day up a bit more, so that I don't try and do too much on one day, um, I might actually be able to make some progress there because I've been typically really, really bad at that sort of planning.
Yeah, it's pretty common that people have a pendulum swinging kind of problem where they overspend and then they overcorrect and then they underspend and it can swing back and forth instead of finding a stable situation or pattern.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
so another technique that's pretty important, I think, that I thought of after our last session and made a note is, so you said you usually have one main productive session in the day, and getting tired can be one of the causes of that. But
Yep.
uh, this is something you can test, and I think this is pretty important. So a lot of the time what happens is people are sort of busy and they never get started on another major thing for the rest of the day. Um, like it's never quite the right time, it doesn't come up, they get sucked into other things. So what you want to do at some point is actually stop everything you're doing and then spend like a solid 10 minutes trying to do one of the more productive things again. And if it doesn't work out, if you're too tired, if you can't focus, that's fine. But you give it a try and you don't give up after 2 minutes, you give it a little while. And sometimes it'll work and you'll find that you do have enough energy. And once you get started on it, it goes smoothly.
Yep. Um, s- sorry. So what you're sort of describing there is like uh so say I do some stuff like in the morning, or we like FI stuff from 10 till 12 and then tutorial from 12 till 2. Then after that there's a little bit of follow up, and then I'm feeling tired, so I don't know, start going through emails and stuff to keep those under control. And then instead of once I'm either done with that or continuing that for too long, like after 15 minutes or after at some set point or whatever else, try and do a bit more on the intense stuff, uh, legitimately, and then uh, at the end of that. regardless of how long it takes, like after 10 minutes sort of thing. But maybe I keep going for another hour, um, go off, finish the emails, and then like do whatever I was going to do that evening. Um, sort of like isn't giving like essentially giving myself one or more chances to actually do a second intense period that day or like hard period.
Yeah. Yeah, it's often better to try again after a several hour break. Like if you have 5 hard hours, then you can wait, say, 5 hours and then be like, okay, now it's time to try again. And just focusing on actually trying again and setting everything else aside for uh, a little while, like 10 minutes, makes a difference. You often won't start instantly.
Mm. Yeah. It
And
occurs
if
to me
you
that
if you keep the other stuff out, it's harder to start.
if I keep the other stuff out, it's harder to start.
Yeah, like if you're still reading Reddit or something,
Oh, as
if
in,
you're
yeah,
like, I'm
no,
gonna start, but you're also like multitasking or something.
yeah, no, no, I have to, yeah, start without multitasking or without keeping any of the distractions there or whatever else. Yep.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, it occurs to me probably like the periods that I've like there's at least one period where we've talked about it, but like sometimes I'll have a sort of second wind or whatever that night, and that's probably just that happening in that I get distracted enough by something that's, on topic or related to a harder topic for 10 minutes plus, and then I'm in that like zone again for another few hours.
yeah.
And if that's
So
happening, or if that's happening regularly at night, it probably means that I could have done it earlier. And if I do it earlier, then I'll probably end up tired again before like 2 a.m. and then having flow-on effects after that.
yeah, so you can try to create those second wins on purpose by sitting down and trying to get started without doing anything else. And yeah, it'll work, I don't know, half the time. Depends.
Yeah, I don't think the success rate necessarily matters because it's sort of
Yeah,
got other
it's not that
purposes.
important.
Yeah,
But so if it
as well.
doesn't work, you'll be a lot more confident that you're actually too tired, so you'll feel better about not doing something hard.
Yeah.
So it'll
Um,
give you more confidence about what situation you're in. So that makes it easier to decide what to do and be happy with your choice.
it also, I think, like one of the things that probably will help is setting up a habit of being able to try for like 10 minutes as opposed to, oh, should I try that thing and looking over it essentially and within like 10 seconds going back. Um, like as in just having that habit of regularly giving myself opportunities for that. Like it would interact with some of the video game stuff, particularly because of the like I have not really practiced like quitting out for like 20 minutes to try and do something else. Um, yeah. Anyway, it's just another good habit to have.
Yeah, so that a similar thing also works when you're stuck on something. So you're having trouble being productive because it's hard and you're getting stuck, and when you try to work on it, it doesn't go very well. So for that situation, what you can do is what people will do is they'll sit there for like a few hours and like beat themselves up and have an awful time, and it's not very efficient or effective. So what works better is you try for 15 minutes and it's not working, so you play video games for an hour, and then you try for another 15 minutes. And if it doesn't work, you just stop again, play another hour of video games. And you just have many different tries where you start at the beginning. And this helps on things where you're stuck, where you're not getting flow going to, try fresher. And because sometimes when you start, you'll get things going like in a different way. Like you try something different each time instead of getting stuck in like a recurring loop.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, if you try something from more different starting points, you have more chances to get unstuck. And breaks help you get a fresh perspective and look at it in a different way.
Yeah. So I'm just sort of like reflecting on, yeah, the ways that I've sort of handled periods like that in the past, and also, yeah, how I sort of was taking each day prior to this week, um, which was usually probably overextending myself, and I'd get to like 4 o'clock. So I'd often like do stuff from somewhere at like 9 or 10 a.m. So I'd have like at least 2 hours beforehand, and then like our tutorials, and then like some other stuff afterwards, where often I'd end up like replying to stuff on Discord or things instead of some of the harder stuff that we talked about because it was hard. And then I'd use all my budget, and by like 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, I'd just be like, I can't do anything, um, sort of thing. Which is like, yeah, at least two of the days last week were going to sleep at like 5 o'clock. So that, yeah, probably indicates the over, I don't know what you call it, like over budgeting.
Yeah, so if you're like really obsessed with a game and like really want to play it and it's distracting you, or just in general, if anything that's distracting you a lot from what you want to do, you can use a similar technique. So you try to do something else, and if you're too distracted, you go back to the thing you want to do, but you give yourself many chances to switch. But you don't
Yep.
make the chances painful, you keep them pretty short. So you go back to the video game for an hour, and then you try switching for 5 minutes, and you're like, nope, too distracted, still really want to play this game. So then you play for 2 hours, and then you try switching for 10 minutes and see if it works. And you can keep repeating that kind of thing. So you're checking in on whether you're actually still really into the game or other distraction on a periodic
Yep.
basis.
Yeah, that makes sense as well. Um, sort of like it. It's the thing in reverse. But
Yeah. It helps you feel better about playing the game because you know you've tried the other stuff, and it's um so of all the times that you play the game like that, there's sometimes where you're just really into it, and it's good if the times you're super into it, you let yourself do it. But you want to catch the times where you're more medium into it and you could stop at some point. So if you're, satisfied that you're catching some of those times where switching is a good idea, it'll also help you be happier at the times when it's not a good idea because you're more confident of that.
yep. Yep. No, which I think is makes a lot of sense. Even only like as in a lot of times where I have a suspicion of yeah being too tired or whatever, I don't actually try and validate it like this. Um,
Yeah.
and then I can that it like it not validating it helps you feel worse about it because you don't like you don't perceive that you have any good reasons. Um, as opposed to being like, well, actually, I just tried that. Um, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's something that I yeah don't do is give myself those chances. So it's definitely the
Yeah.
first thing to start doing.
Another thing is reading is reading or watching videos, like educational videos, is often easier than writing or sort of creating things. So you can first of all use that as a lower budget activity, like reading, that's still somewhat productive. But also, it's that can be good for validating how tired you are because you can get clearer feedback. So when you're trying to be creative and you fail, it's hard to tell was I tired or creativity is sporadic, so it's hard to tell what the cause of failing is.
Yep.
But if you're trying to read, reading should work pretty consistently in general. So if you're losing focus while reading, you can go, oh, I can see clearly that I'm tired. I've lost focus 3 times on this page. So you can get like more obvious feedback that you're actually tired.
Also, I mean, there's a lot more because so with something like I mean, educational videos. So one of the things that I end up watching a lot is like and often it's even of stuff that I already know, um, but like physics videos particularly or space related stuff. Um, and I do that when I'm tired because I've like uh, I have like enough pre-existing knowledge about it that it's very low effort usually. Particularly, I mean, even the like unless it's a video of a lecture on YouTube of like a university level lecture, everything's pretty accessible. So it's super low effort. But if I have trouble doing that, which sometimes if I'm really tired, I can't pay attention to it, that gives me way more information about like exactly how tired I am. Um,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
so
can
you can
test
try to
different
get more
thresholds.
of
Yeah,
that stuff done. And if it actually doesn't work, then you'll feel good about playing games or something even easier.
yeah. Um, because it's not just a I don't want to type thing. Um, which makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. Um, no, I think there's a I sort of maybe have a bit of a tendency sometimes to so with like the currencies analogy, Um, I think like one of the reasons that it's dangerous to do things the way that I usually do is you don't have good information about when you're taking out like a loan essentially. Um, in that I know it's a bit dangerous to take the analogy too far, but like there are you can like overexert yourself. Um,
Yeah.
you know, so I think I have a tendency to do that and not pay attention to like warning signs as such. Um, anyway, yeah, and that's in large part I think what these sort of periods are about are trying to correct that. Um, which is sort of like annoying at the moment in terms of the first time I'm thinking about it for that particular idea. Um, because it feels like taking things slower. But I don't know if that, well, sometimes it might pan out, sometimes it might not. But yeah, it feels slower at least.
Yeah, so finding ways to monitor how tired you are, how much your budgets are used up, helps you a lot with deciding what to do and be happy with your decision. It also helps you figure out when the issue is something else, like not wanting to do something, having an objection to it.
Yeah, yep.
And it helps you know that you're going at a good pace and that faster wouldn't work. The more information you have helps you make those judgments so you can not be wondering.
Yeah. Um, yep. All right. Do you mind if we take a quick break?
Go ahead.
Just 'cause we're about the halfway point. Anyway, so that sort of feels good. All right, I'll be back in a sec. Okay.
Yeah, so tangentially, or kind of off topic, I just wrote a few notes about um, yeah, the way tutoring works is that I'm in a helper role and you're primarily, uh, have to figure things out yourself.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Um, yeah, I mean, yeah. Obviously,
Okay.
we share a few views on education and stuff, and I think this is the only sensible thing, like sensible way to do it. Not just for us, but like far more in general as well.
Yeah, I wanted to check or make sure that you had that somewhat actively in your mind, like not just something you would agree with if asked, but that you're like reminding yourself of it sometimes.
Yeah, no.
Partly because people
Sorry.
fall into bad habits sometimes because our culture screws this up in some ways. Like the school system's pretty bad at it. So sometimes people like default to sort of expecting the authority figure to be in charge of everything and make the results happen, because that's kind of what teachers are supposed to do in school. And
Yeah, no,
yeah, actively remembering this kind of stuff can be a bit inspiring in some ways. Like you can see it positively that you control your own fate.
I think it does both in that like it's an amplifying sort of thing in general. Like the other side of it, and part of the reason like for some of my thoughts or actions in the last week were like are the other way, where it's like I'm letting like primarily I'm letting myself down if I'm not doing what I can do, sort of thing. If I'm doing things for bad reasons or whatever else. Um, uh, so it's like I feel like it makes uh if you don't feel good about it for whatever reason, then it amplifies that as well as amplifying the feeling of achievement when you do like you know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah. So but yeah, no, I am like I think I'm pretty conscious of that. Um, I definitely like
Okay.
I mean the closest or the most relevant times that I've sort of or that in this thing so like before the past month the idea of like don't shoot the messenger when it comes to like errors and stuff like I already had that for years, that's not a problem. um but thinking about it with uh like regards to like frustrations I felt like with myself sort of thing, like with the first Zaz paragraph, um
Hmm.
like it's still easy to forget that when you're thinking about yourself, um like don't shoot the messenger type thing, in that you're a messenger too in some ways. um
Right.
yeah, so anyway, if I didn't, I could have been frustrated at you, I guess is my point. Um, and I had like multiple different, when I was thinking about it, like multiple different reasons not to, sort of thing. And this was sort of part of it in that it's like, yeah. Anyway, those ideas aren't particularly clear to me, but hopefully the gist is there.
Yeah. 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 That sounds okay. Okay. So on the currency budgets and motivation and scheduling stuff, do you think you have enough of a clear plan to work on it and make some progress? Or do we need to do some summary stuff? Or do you have open questions?
I think so I have one open question, particularly. I think in terms of things to try, and so I think in terms of like tools for understanding like what's going on at the moment sort of thing, not in a deeper explanatory way, but like the what do you call it, the tree that I did this morning and stuff. Like those sort of tools I
Uh-huh.
think are fine. Um, I think there's more of an idea around what's happening there that is essentially fine as well. The big worry that I have, which is a weird thing to say as a worry, um, is that like I'd sort of like early on realized that these like periods clear themselves up, sort of thing, in greater or lesser time, but to some extent, um, I eventually, at the very least, become impatient or, so annoyed with myself that it's like that ends up becoming inspiring in a weird way or whatever else. Um, the last time it happened for like a months long thing in March, April, uh, I sort of just let it happen and was like, I know this will clear itself up eventually, so I'm not going to worry about it. And it did. Uh, the thing I'm worried about now is that it does the same thing before I have enough opportunity to actually try and. I mean, why should I be worried about it though? I've made progress this time. I know what directions to take it in. It would only be good for me in the next month or thereabouts to have it go away now. And next time it happens, I can actually solve it for real. But if I, yeah, why would I be worried about it going away now? Anyway, yeah, just talking through that sort of took away the question, I guess.
Okay, that's good.
Um,
I wrote a quick note that you should expect if you're changing something like your scheduling policies and how you think about organizing your day. That's like a pretty big thing. You have a lot of habits and standard policies that are on autopilot. And So switching will be a process. Don't be too impatient. You should expect it to, take time to make adjustments. Not You're not going to fully change all at once instantly, etc.
Yep. Yep. Cool. I think that's sort of, I mean, luckily, I guess these periods sort of ruin my schedule a bit anyway. So I've got a lot more flexibility, um, or I will have. So anyway, good ground to make changes, but um, yeah, I won't expect too much.
Okay, so on a separate note, you sent these messages about potentially responding on less wrong, and you were not sure if you would post. So
Yeah. So
this is the kind of thing that for a fair amount of people seems to be like fun, inspiring, and motivational to get into debates with people, which I think there are some common errors there, but it's valuable to have motivation and enjoy things. So it might get you spending more time on philosophy that also is not the most difficult time. So there's definitely
yeah.
some potential upsides there.
Um, yeah, so I think I have a few reasons not for posting it, by the way. Um,
Okay.
I do find it fun, but I mean, thinking about that and the times where in terms of just going back to the debate type thing, um, so I tend to often end up being more verbose than the other person. Don't find that it ever comes to anything. Like it's fun because of writing the responses or whatever, as opposed to anything else that comes of it, because nothing else really does. Um, like, I mean, one of the reasons that I didn't post this was that I was thinking about like what would be the point of posting it? Like, is it for that guy particularly? Is it for me? Like, why would I want to do that? One of the reasons that I wanted to write it was to sort of make sure that some of the ideas in my head about what I thought he was talking about were clear enough to write about. Um, there's a little bit of like jumping around where like with talking about critical change for a minute, which I think isn't not relevant, but it could be put in there better. Um, but otherwise, I like, yeah, it's the type of thing where I'd be like more inclined just to post it like in this sort of context, but to something like FI, and then have a discussion about like the post, not about the topic of the post, sort of thing. Like that's more interesting to me at the moment. Because why am I trying to change this guy's mind? Um, yeah,
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons to talk with people. They'll say things that weren't what you expected, so you can improve your mental model of what people are like, and
mm,
you can come up with theories about how to explain something that won't fail for the reasons that your explanations have failed in the past, so that
yep,
then when it fails, you're getting a learning about a new failure mode.
new data, yep. So there are like I do
And
those sort of things anyway. This wasn't that case though. Um, like I do it with Flux and stuff, where I'll try and explain something in a new way, and sort of use someone as a guinea pig. Um,
right, yeah, and it's also a writing practice opportunity and an organizing your thoughts opportunity, and potentially an opportunity to use a tree or an outline and so on. So if you find you're not doing philosophy often enough, then it's good to look for more opportunities that you'll actually do. If you're doing enough writing and so on, then you don't need this opportunity necessarily.
yeah, I mean, I don't feel like I was um, doing enough writing. I mean, curiously, this was when did I write this? It would have been Wednesday. Um, yeah, and that was probably at that time as well. Um, oh wait, no, that's your 10:30 p.m. That would be mid-afternoon
Yeah,
for me.
yeah, that's going to be Wednesday for you.
Um, Yeah, I was thinking about events relevant to, so instead of conversion, just what happened on what days. Because I replied like the day after I read it, and when I read it, I was out. Or sorry, after you sent the original message. Um, anyway, yeah. Um, I think as well there was one of the reasons I wanted to write it was that I thought this guy was wrong. Um, and obviously a lot of stuff from Yes No came to mind. Which might be somewhat obvious that it's like that I'm talking about some of those ideas without mentioning them in that. But yeah, I mean, yeah, the last half of the last paragraph is basically just making your goals, I think, or the middle part. But yeah, um,
Okay, so big picture, main learning goals, I think, are text analysis and writing type stuff, which grammar feeds into. And so we could analyze this stuff if you think it's like worth analyzing. I don't know how much effort you put into it, and if you're like,
uh, a decent part. I started writing it on the page. I'm not sure how well that would have gone in that. I don't have an account there, so I probably would have had to register on anyway. But I did. I copied it out, and then, um, I mean, I was most of the. I'd started replying when I posted that the second message there. Like the reply is interesting to analyze. Um, not that the reply itself is particularly that interesting. It's just sort of like interesting in terms of the ideas that are baked into it and stuff. Um, yeah, I'm not sure if there were any particular errors and stuff in the thing that I wrote, then I'd want to know about that. But in terms of like fine detailed analysis, it wasn't like the highest quality thing I'd done, but I was editing as I went and like trying to make it clear. I'd rearrange things a few times and stuff like that. Um,
um, yeah, I haven't read it carefully. I noticed like communication issues, I think,
as
but
in
I didn't.
talking cross purposes type thing,
Yeah, talking
or
to the person, like I didn't think that this would be particularly effective at communicating with people unless wrong, but I didn't read it in full to look for content issues.
I was thinking about grammar stuff as I went through, so I did try to make sure. Like I was remembering one of the comma rules particularly, which is like to do with dependent and independent clauses between two of them. Um, so I was thinking about that sort of stuff going through it. I'm not sure. Um, so yeah, one example is so the third sentence in the third paragraph starts on the end of the second line, finding the bottleneck. So finding the so like that's an example of the comma rule, where I put a comma between those two clauses because they're independent. Uh, and I put the bottleneck instead of it, A to make it clearer, but then without that it would take away the comma. Anyway, so I was thinking about that as I went through it. I didn't edit it much beyond
Yeah,
that, I don't think.
that comma there is actually optional because both clauses are simple. The simpler
Ah,
the
yep.
clauses are, the more it becomes an optional comma. So this is, yeah, I think you could go either way on this comma. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yep, that makes sense.
But yeah, my general impression of this was it was under-explained. Like it would be hard for someone to follow what you were talking about if they didn't have a lot of background knowledge. Like you're sort of assuming some of your context without bridging the gap to a someone else's context.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like one big thing is like the guy mentions giving away more than 20 copies of the goal. Presumably he's familiar with all the terms in that and has read other Goldratt stuff. Um,
Maybe.
so I would be I'd be really surprised if someone like actually I was going to say I'd be really surprised if someone had like given away 20 copies of a book without reading the author's other works. But I've given away more than 20 copies of BOI and I haven't read Fabric yet, so I probably shouldn't be that surprised.
Yeah, the thing about this particular guy is So he said it's important to recognize the limits of the chain metaphor, which seems a little anti-Goldratt, because Goldratt said it was a really great metaphor that's widely applicable.
Yeah, as in its limits are some of the
So
lowest limits that possibly we can have on these. Yeah, so that struck me as
yeah, and he seemed like he was disagreeing with me in some way. So I asked him if he had a specific limit in mind, like because he seemed to be saying basically that this analysis doesn't always apply. So I asked him like when does it not apply specifically, and he said he didn't really give a concrete example, but he said the feasibility of mapping to most real world situations is the limit. Like basically it's just infeasible most of the time because real world situations are too complex to do this kind of calculation and find bottlenecks. And that is utterly incompatible with Goldratt. Like the choice talks about inherent simplicity.
yeah. Well, it's incompatible with Goldratt in general, but I think it's sort of incompatible with the goal as well. Like the
Yeah,
staff believe that to start with, and the book is their journey, realizing that it wasn't the case in many ways, um, among other things. Like
yes,
it's yeah,
the factory is complicated, but they find bottlenecks anyways. And it's the same with software, which is an example I mentioned in my article, is like the standard technique for optimizing very complex software is to find the bottlenecks.
yeah. Even if you don't understand why they're there yet or anything else, just start a profiler and look for the thing chewing time.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
just
no, it's
measure a bunch, and there are some bottlenecks, and you find them and you focus there.
and it doesn't matter whether you're talking about Photoshop with like 100 million lines of code or whatever it is ridiculous, or your little
Yeah,
pet project to make triangles on a picture or something or other. Like yeah, no, I think so that struck me. Um, the other thing was I don't think he was clear about it. Clear about the problem either. In that, so I think in my reply I said something like I have like an intuition, but I'm not able to wrap my fingers around it. Um, there was some. I'm not sure if I actually put a thing in there, but I was going to like talk about metaphorical fingers, sort of as a bit of a what do you call it thingy counterpoint to his thing about metaphors. Um, but I don't think he's clear about his problem in that like he seemed to be conflating some of the issue with like choosing what to do about it and having like multiple different options what to do, um, which is what my third paragraph is addressing, I think. Um, but yeah, but it's not. So do I say? Um, oh yeah, so yeah, second.
yeah.
Yeah, so
In
the
general,
line.
I just think this is too abbreviated for any of them to know what you're talking about.
Yeah, fair enough.
So you have a problem like even before the point of considering the content itself because it's skipping too many steps. So it has an inferential distance problem. Have you seen the inferential distance articles?
No, I don't think so. I feel like is this stuff you've written?
No, these are from the Less Wrong community actually. I found them because I was arguing with someone and I was trying to explain something about finding common ground and um, I thought what I was saying was not original and it's got to be like a kind of standard idea. So I wanted to show them that it's like other people have also suggested something similar. So I was like searching and I found these articles that have overlap with what I think, and I think they're pretty good. I'll link you a couple. You might find these useful for thinking about how to communicate with people. Two
Yeah, cool.
more.
Um, Yudkowsky's probably the best person to find as well, in that in my head he's sort of the I don't know, less wrong
Yeah,
archetypical goal person.
he's much better than average. Like he has some major flaws, but he's really good sometimes. Most people like they don't have enough. They're very rarely exceptionally good at anything. And he manages that like sometimes, which is actually really important. A lot of
Yeah.
people like they don't quite have enough variance, or at least not positive variance in their ideas. Maybe they have plenty of negative variance. Um, so if someone even inconsistently has some really good ideas, that can be a lot more valuable than someone even if the other person's mean is higher, but their standard deviation is lower. Because you want to cherry pick the best ideas from people. And a bunch of average ideas, even if you can keep your quality consistent, don't actually contribute much to the world because there's plenty of those.
Yep. Yep. Um, that's sort of curious to think about in uh just with regards to um like you can have someone who has a better idea of the world make less contribution or a smaller contribution than someone who has worse ideas about the world, but occasionally has these weird genius moments in a particular scope or whatever else.
Yeah, you can't be like too bad and just throwing out wild ideas, or you won't actually be able to recognize when some of them are useful, and people won't want to pay attention to you because they're like, if I wanted random ideas, I could just make my own random ideas. I don't need to
Yeah.
evaluate yours. So it takes some skill to like just randomly having a good idea and having no way to judge that it's good isn't good enough. But if you can like recognize it partially, like with semi-accuracy, then you can selectively spread your maybe good ideas to other people and get some actual attention.
Yes. Yep. Yep. Well, thinking about what do you call it, Deutsch and Popper with regards to the issues on like arguments and degree, sort of feels a lot like that in that they've obviously got a lot of related skills about telling whether ideas are good or not, and so they've got a much lower error rate than people in general. Um, so whether yeah, the fact that someone could understand that mistake does not mean that their ideas are going to be any better than Deutsche Popper's ideas were when they had the mistake.
Popper, I find a lot more hit or miss. Like he just sort of rejected capitalist economics without writing about it or reading Mises, who he was familiar with and didn't like and didn't give any rebuttal to. And he never said, like, I agree with X author's rebuttal of this. He never, endorsed any particular position, but he still wrote a bunch of anti capitalist stuff.
Were
And
there any
there's
novel
other stuff
arguments
like,
in it, or was it just
no, nothing
okay?
remotely relevant to Mises's case for capitalism, like nothing that would challenge Mises.
Yeah, okay.
And he advocated like TV censorship and government taking a bunch of control of industry. Some like really unusually extreme authoritarian stuff.
This seems, yeah, I can never
It's
spell
partly
tolerance
like
properly.
change over time stuff. Some of that stuff came when he was like a lot older. I think maybe he got better at epistemology, but worse at politics over time.
So yeah, um, I can sort of maybe describe, maybe imagine that as a thing, sort of like a U shapes and inverse U shapes. Um, so sorry, let me bump the thing. Yeah, so this is just a Wikipedia thing, but what I was looking for was this date. Um, so I don't know if the Open Society and its Enemies was, yeah, no, 1945. Um, but just the censorship stuff on TV feels entirely antithetical to this little paragraph right here, which I think is a very decent paragraph, and sort of highlights a lot of the issues about discussion and debate today. Even though the paradox of tolerance as a term is sort of means opposite of what it used to mean.
Yeah, I think people use it to attack tolerance. That's the general impression I get.
Yes, people who like to think of themselves as tolerant use it to attack any perceived intolerance, is I think how it's used now, as opposed to what Karl Popper sort of mentions, which is particularly like, you know, use force if they're not going to be rational, but denouncing all argument, you know, uh, fists and pistols. Like it's very, very clearly sets out boundaries there, um, that people don't use, or it's that's not part of the canonical usage today, unfortunately.
Right.
So
Yeah, the thing you should be intolerant of is basically violence, but everything else is fair game.
yeah, um, yeah. The way I sort of think about it, it's like explanationless tolerance is the bad thing, as opposed to it's not really a paradox when you look at it like that. Um,
Yeah. So the inferential distance stuff is about how many steps does it take to get from your position to my position? Like how many steps of background knowledge are involved?
one
And
thing that,
also,
oh, yep,
go ahead.
I was just going to say that sticks out to me a hell of a lot more now, and I explicitly used to do it because it feels like a intelligent person thing to do in air quotes. Um, Starting off with like grand statements about historical context or things like that. Like even like academic papers do it as well. Like, oh, I should start by introducing the idea of democracy 2,500 years ago, as opposed to like anyway, yeah. It's like bringing up EEA as the thing there. Um, Sort of feels typical of that. If he wanted to make a point about background knowledge and culture, he could do so later. I don't know. I
Yeah,
haven't read it, so
so
maybe that's a thing, but it sticks out to me.
if if you're going to try to communicate with people in writing or just in general, it's important to try to understand what can you expect from your audience, what kind of common ground you have, what universally shared or shared in the subculture you're targeting, background premises and knowledge can you rely on and refer to without having to explain it, and then
Mm.
how many steps from that to what you want to explain. And
I
with
realized,
things like FI, it's a lot of steps, so you have to be careful with that.
um, I realized as well that complaint I just had this is possibly one of the most ironic articles to make that complaint about. Well, it just in a small subset of articles where it could be considered ironic, in that like starting from a point like that is much more likely to be common ground than starting with like background knowledge is universal knowledge or something like that. Like if you start with other things, other points that get into the meat of it more, you can skip a whole lot of establishing ground, which presumably part of this article is about like how you can use that to like skip forward and back or skip sort of you can skip much faster with the deeper background stuff. Um, and so if you start articles very generally or whatever else, then um, it helps people find the point where they actually do disagree, if they do.
Yeah. Yudkowsky likes evolutionary psychology type arguments, and he writes for an audience that mostly does too. So it works okay to bring up like hunter-gatherer stuff and evolution at the beginning because most of his audience is into that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so then the illusion of transparency article is about how when you speak, it seems clear to you, like your meaning is transparent to you, but uh, it's often not transparent to other people, and you have to understand their perspective. So it's a similar kind of issue that relates to what premises you have in common that you can build on, and if you're skipping steps from those, then they're not going to understand what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it relates to like communication is hard, and
Yeah.
yeah, so
Um,
that's a significant part of writing is trying to think about what your audience is and what do they already know, and then how can you work step by step from there so that they don't get lost.
yeah. Um,
But if that's hard, you can start easier by writing things to yourself or for a very like limited group, such as your friend. Writing for a single person who you know well, then you can rely on a lot more shared background knowledge and you know what they know. So it's an easier task than when you write for, strangers who you only understand through broader categorizations.
Yeah.
and have less shared premises you can build on.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Anyway, thoughts are coming to mind, but they're unclear, and I don't think I can put them into words fast enough. But yeah, I haven't thought much about these things in the past.
Okay, so do you want to do text analysis for the last half hour, or do you have any other ideas or questions?
I don't think nothing's really coming to mind. Text analysis is probably good. Um, that's productive at the very least, as opposed
Okay,
to me sitting here trying to think of ideas that aren't clear. Yeah.
okay, well, let's try this article, or no, let's try Yudkowsky. The illusion of transparency one.
Oh, I do have an. Maybe this question is an easy question.
Okay,
It's a collection of sort of ideas that I'm not exactly sure, but I mean the basic question is analyzing, or how do you analyze errors, particularly as opposed to, so say or is there even much of a technique sort of thing? So the sort of thought came up with
yeah,
some of the grammar stuff. Um, if you know that something's grammatically incorrect, uh, I mean I don't have I guess a particular question because like if it's grammatically incorrect, then even just drawing a tree, you can see like there'll be a link there that doesn't fit, or that there's missing stuff, or that, just doing a type analysis of the words, as in just like listing out what they are, um, could show those sort of things. Um, I guess it's not really in any ways uh, like,
yeah. With grammar, you can try to point out what specific rule is being violated. Like, a clause needs a subject. This clause doesn't have a subject, there's your problem.
yeah,
Or, this adjective should go right before a noun or right after a linking verb, but it is not in one of those positions and doesn't make any sense.
hmm.
Or,
Yep.
this modifier at the end of the sentence is ambiguous about what it applies to. There are two
None of the
different trees that fit the sentence, and I can't tell which one you mean.
Yeah, but they both have different semantic meanings or something. The
Yeah,
So it's sort of curious in that this question's sort of been in the back of my mind for a while, but out of the times where I've uh like seen people make mistakes, um, or seen mistakes or found my own mistakes, I've never had any trouble actually understanding them. Um, there was a fun sentence in my D&D group the other night, which was the king's half brother Michael does not love him. Um, and I realized that that was like, and I don't think I would have realized a month ago that it was not grammatical, but it's just use it like the subject is still like is the king's half brother Michael not loving him, as opposed to himself, or another word that you'd use there. Obviously, it means the king has a half brother and his half brother doesn't love him. But yeah, so it's sort of like errors. I don't know. There's no different real methodology, but I
yeah.
don't
In that
understand.
sentence, kings is an adjective, not a noun, so it's not a proper antecedent
Yes.
for him.
Yeah. I mean, it would be like it's actually really annoying when you want to refer to two people of the same gender in a sentence.
Yeah, it can be.
Um, Anyway, yeah, no, okay, errors. I sort of feel like, yeah. So if people skip steps, or I mean, the general process, I guess, is you come up with a conjecture for what they meant, what they, or what they, wanted to say, or what they thought that they were doing, and then how that differs from the reality, and that sort of is,
Yeah, more broadly, if you try to get a coherent meaning out of what they said and you fail to do it, then there's either a content error or a communication error. or an error in your own analysis.
Yeah, yep. Yep.
And then you can try to narrow down what it is. Often back and forth communication helps there. Like you can ask clarifying questions and try to figure out what they meant. And, were you misunderstanding what they meant, or did they mean what it looks like and it just doesn't make sense, or what? But the skipping steps thing I find really important, and that's part of what I've tried to emphasize with trees is what is the connection between these two nodes? We've done some of that stuff because that helps you avoid skipping steps and having non sequiturs where you're just throwing things together and they aren't directly connected.
Yep.
That's something
It's
that Goldratt emphasizes too.
yeah, it occurs to me just like it reminds me a lot of the stuff from sort of early high school mathematics or late middle school, early high school for American system, I guess. Um, Pre-calc sort of stuff. Even after that, but with algebra, like uh, there was a few silly mistakes that I used to make that I wouldn't spot, like dropping negative signs or things like that. Um, but skipping steps with like expansion and things is a massive, massive source of errors, and it's why you're told to write things out with one operation per change in line.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, I know what you
yeah,
mean.
and even like breaking down like the meaning of a sentence. Um, yeah, the doing it as a tree without the metadata of how they're relating to each other is compressing that step. Um, I guess there's a lot of steps that we sort of implicitly compress because they're not relevant, like what each word means and things like that. But our error rate
Yeah,
is low
you
enough
you
there.
have to skip some steps because there are infinitely many steps you could do, but so you need some understanding of what the defaults are and what you can treat as background knowledge and what's a relevant step. And that actually
Yeah.
does take some good judgment and some cultural knowledge.
Yeah. Um, it reminds me of the to make an apple pie from scratch, you first need to create the universe type thing. Like if you didn't skip any steps, then you eventually, or you essentially go down to the finest grain level possible and just simulate the universe, which is a bit boring and off topic by comparison to actually answering whatever it was you tried to.
Yeah, so when you skip steps, it increases your error rate a lot. And then if you're communicating, it makes the communication a lot harder to understand. And even if the person does understand the communication mostly, then they have to, whatever steps you did in your head, they have to like replicate those steps. Um,
Mhm.
so they have to also replicate the steps without making an error. So it's like you had to do it in your head and not get it wrong, and then they have to do it in their head and not get it wrong. And they're at a disadvantage because your communication, even in a good case, was maybe 90% effective, but they're still, less clear on what's going on than you are.
Occurs to me that like variance in people's ideas or experience is like one of the really important things about that is that it means that even if two people are overall of pretty similar capacity, they have like much different capacity or very different capacities in certain things. And to do that sort of thing you were just describing, where you're both trying to do error correction to get the idea that's correct, but then also trying to do error correction to figure out what error they made. Um, like that person has to have, they can't have the same capacity as the other person. Um, like those two people will end up just talking about it ad infinitum because they won't be able to see the bigger picture sort of thing. Whereas if you can actually see the other person's error, then it means your capacity has to be at least like for that thing, like substantially higher. Um, Maybe not double or things, it could be like 10%, but whatever that highness, whatever that gap is, but there needs to be a gap there. Anyway, yep.
Yeah, yeah, dealing with other people's errors is more confusing because you're missing information. No matter how much they communicate, you've got less info about what they were talking about than they do. So to like really outdo them is difficult. It's similar to you need a significant skill gap in order to understand people's like inner mental states better than they do. Like if you're going to beat their introspection from the outside,
Yes.
that takes a pretty big gap.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Should we go back to Yudkowsky? We up to?
Okay. So let's try the third paragraph because it's more complicated, I think. Or
I feel like this is where we actually get into the meat of what he's talking about, right? I mean,
yeah. Okay. So let's
yeah.
try this one and see how it goes.
Oh no.
My first impression is this is actually a pretty simple structure and pretty easy to follow.
The only thing that really seemed weird to me was like we sort of go from abstract to then just when you discover a new oasis without like if someone,
Right, it's
you
an
know, in this
example
time,
without a there's no like here's an example statement.
yeah. It's also not clear the difference between talking to, I mean, maybe the first sentences gave some, like the first paragraphs gave more context, but the swap from like talking to like you about how you think now to you as someone trying to imagine being, you know, in this hunter-gatherer context. Um, but yeah, but other than that, I think I found comprehensive, or in terms of comprehension, it was pretty straightforward. Um,
Yeah. Throwing in the words e.g. is really short, so I do it fairly often. Like you could put when you discover e.g. a new oasis.
yeah, if it was that, then I mean, there's the more explicit EG at the start, but even just putting it in the middle before just the term new oasis just makes it clear that this seems like a non sequitur, but it's not. Or I'm going to bring it back, or whatever else.
Yeah, people sometimes write without loss of generality right in front of the example. The point is that what you're doing is not specific to oases.
Yep. It's sort of a so in terms of the hierarchy of the text, um, like it's unclear. Does he actually explicitly say anywhere, um, or not explicitly, but like, is there implicitly or in the words like a difference between what's general and what's not? Like, I think the background knowledge is that people realize that the oasis is not anything particular to do with this example, except insofar as what it means to hunter-gatherers. Um,
Yeah, so an oasis is supposed to be something that they are familiar with.
Um, so I mean, one thing that occurs to me, there's some implied words missed out. In that, like, when you want to communicate that you've discovered a new oasis, you don't have to explain to your fellow tribes members what it is or why it's good or etc. As opposed to when you've discovered a new oasis, you don't have to do any of that because it's not involved with discovering an oasis. Um, so there's a bit of that there. These labels may be a bit big for this thing, but well, whoops. This feels like, yeah, I reckon the structure is we've got like example, expansion of the example, or like clarification for us, background knowledge, and then yeah. I actually feel like it's a little bit confused in that uh so you talked about discovering a new oasis, you don't have to explain what an oasis is. And then uh like he brings that up again, but after this thing in between. Um
Yeah.
so as opposed to let's imagine that, you're someone in this period and you've just discovered an oasis. Then only you know where the oasis lies. This is private knowledge. You don't need to, you know, you don't have to explain to your fellow tribes member what an oasis is or how it's good to drink or stop something. Then everyone has background knowledge to understand it. Like that sort of thing. It's yeah, that part of this sentence I think is not in the best spot.
Yeah, so this part
Mm,
is about
okay.
they already know what water is, and then this part It's also about they already know what water is.
Yep. I realize as well, in terms of the analysis, just looking at the difference between our two things, so where I put my top right node, when you explain things in an ancestral environment, you almost never have to explain your concepts. So as sort of like the conclusion from the, reinforcing the topic sentence, but it's not
Hmm.
because the topic sentence is about one step away, which is what the last thing is about. Um, it's, yeah, like that instead, would be that correction.
Yeah, so overall, it's understandable. You can figure out what his point is. The structure's not terribly complicated. So generally, it's
No,
pretty good.
yeah,
The details are not, fully optimized, but it's pretty understandable. Having some redundancy can be useful, but that's actually a tricky thing is how much redundancy to have and what to have redundancy for and where to put it. Because
yeah.
people people don't read with the expectation that like every word is crucial. They sort of expect that if something is important, they'll pick it up somewhere even if they skip half the stuff. And this makes
You
it hard to write in a condensed way for typical people.
you also have to try and guess what the errors they'll make reading it are, or I guess common errors are one thing you can do, but going beyond that is sort of pretty dangerous because you'll add redundancy in a way that most people will find boring or, takes away from
Yeah,
the
you
article.
definitely have to limit redundancy. Italics can help some. People skip italics a lot less.
Yep. Um,
You can't use
just
them
thinking
too
about
often, though.
just thinking about this, the second sentence, I think it was in the paragraph. Like when you discover a new oasis, you don't have to explain. Um, uh, so the first clause there, you discover a new oasis, that's the subordinate clause, right? In terms of you don't have to explain to your fellow tribe members what an oasis is when you discover an oasis. Um, like
Yeah, this is
the
a
order,
sub part.
but the problem with that is that the topic of the sentence is like the thing that follows clearly from this is like take the example of discovering an oasis, and so the sentence's structure doesn't reflect that, which like is particularly I think what makes the next part um, confusing, or not confusing, but like structurally not as good.
Right.
Um,
So the grammatically key part, you don't have to explain. Let's look at the grammatically key parts in the other sentences. So you are unlikely to end up. Next one. You know where. This is private knowledge. Everyone has background. This is universal knowledge. And then we have another when, so it's you almost never have to explain.
there's a lot of negatives and are there some double negatives? But I don't think there's actually any double negatives.
So there's a lot of information content and modifiers in this sentence.
Hmm.
Like if you just read the red parts, you don't really know what he's talking about.
No, well, it sounds like there's a few
So
exceptions, but it
in
sounds essentially like
modifiers,
um like a lot of these things that we've underlined are like a direct negations of the other parts. You don't have to explain, you have to explain, you almost never have to explain, etc.
yeah. So I'm highlighting some of the key information in Aqua.
So in that sentence you're underlining just now, the semicolon at the end is, I think, like grammatically wrong for the sentence because
This
it.
one, where?
So this is
Think about
universal
water.
knowledge. Just before that. Yeah, in that it like the comma and the semicolon are. I feel like in conflict. Like if you could put parentheses or em dashes or something like that in place of the comma and the semicolon, I think it would make sense. Um,
Oh, this is just an incomplete list. He just listed two items with a comma and he didn't like and a third one.
well, one of them is concrete and one of them is abstract though as well, right?
Everyone has
I
the
get. Oh,
background to understand your description of the oasis, to understand the concepts needed to think about water. Yeah,
oh,
one's
okay.
more concrete than the other, but I think it's supposed to be a list of what background people have. They have the background to understand point one, point two, and then the list ends with no list
So
terminator. I don't think the issue is
I
related to the semicolon though. You could just like erase that extra part.
I read it differently in that I didn't read the first part. Like I didn't read that as a list of two objects. I read that as like an example of a general concept. Um, like the concepts needed to think about water I saw as like parenthetical, um, or that it would be better as parenthetical as opposed to the way that it's more connected to the first half of the sentence than the second, which I mean it is, but it gets that from order anyway, whereas the universal knowledge is like better fitting for the background knowledge as opposed to the concepts needed to think about water.
Yeah, my reading it's a little bit broken actually because we have everyone has the background to understand the concepts needed to think about water. So we have background to understand the concepts needed to think about. Like there's significant redundancy there. But if you don't repeat the to understand, you got a broken sentence.
Yeah. So I sort
Like
of read
what
it like,
else would be the lead into concepts?
so if the comma was a colon instead, and then you had some bigger thing like an em dash but instead of the semicolon, I feel like that would make more sense. You could probably still just leave the semicolon there and have the colon earlier, but it becomes more confusing that way.
Oh, so you think the concepts needed to think about water are the background knowledge necessary to understand the description of the oasis?
It's a large enough representative example of it, but not the total thing. So, yeah, so if we just like cut out this is universal knowledge, and had a stop at the end, and then added parentheses and like an EG in front of the concepts needed to think about water, it's not specific enough to cover everything, but that would be how I'd sort of read it. Um, in that, yeah, the concepts needed is an expansion of background knowledge. Um, but then the background knowledge is the universal knowledge, I think, in that
Yeah, I think
sentence.
it's just doesn't really quite work regardless.
No, I mean, you could word it to be more clearly in any case.
Okay, so if we look at the blue in contrast to the red, we see things like ancestral environment, inferential step, oasis, why, how, oasis location, um, understanding a description, concepts needed, ancestral environment, concepts, one new concept, not two. It actually has the feel of like more of the content of what the paragraph is talking about.
It's also, I feel like, easy to see that the paragraph is really talking about two things. One is in the example, and the second is the analysis of the example. Whereas the red bits make no distinction between the two. Well, I mean, I'm obviously putting the category in there, in that it's not explicit in the colors, but the red bits don't give you any of that metadata.
Yeah, he's mixing an example and an analysis, and they're not
Mm.
labeled very clearly.
No, I think that's fairly common when it's short like this, but the order and construction of the sentences is confusing. I mean, it's not,
Yeah,
this is sort of one of the things I've run into a lot of people's tendency to sort of, at this sort of point of talking about something, they would say, but you understood what it meant, so why are you bothering? Type thing. There's a lot of resistance to actually um, trying to do this well.
Yeah, if people actually say what they mean more clearly, it's easier to debate with them or express where you disagree or analyze it, etc. Like communication and stuff is hard enough if people are doing a good job rather than if they're like leaving in known errors. Every time they leave in known errors, then the reader has to guess, are they doing this on purpose or is it a real error? And if it is on purpose, what is the real thing that they actually meant? And, it adds another source of error where you incorrectly guess what thing they did not write that they actually meant,
So
or you incorrectly guess whether they literally meant what they said or not.
yeah, there's a type. I don't think you covered this in that list then, but a thing that came up the other day talking to someone is they found this some I mean, I think the word contract is in there just so that they can have four Cs, but it's a bad word for this. What they mean is essentially like a code of conduct type thing, or that like you find on a lot of like under contributing .md usually on open source products. Um, and I saw this goals section. I thought, oh, that's really interesting. Um, and then I actually read them. So this one particularly stood out to me that I used as an example in the discussion. Um, now the what occurs to me is that I think that because people need to do some error process, like they need to do some error correction on this, they think less about what it's actually suggesting. Um, and so, like in this discussion, I pointed out,
So this point is too sophisticated and distracting, so they
yeah,
think less about the main point.
well, so there's like to allow the
Because this one's so abstract that it distracts from the concretes.
um, so do you mean in regards to the other points? I just mean in terms of just reading, like, and understanding what this sentence is saying. So
Oh, okay.
there's two mistakes that I think are crucial, like that make this a very, very bad sentence. Um, one grammatical and one like knowledge explanatory type thing. Um, so the grammatical one, so to allow the project to develop faster and more accurately by increasing the diversity of decision-making process. So what they mean is increasing the diversity of participation in the processes used, I think. That's what the guy who sent this to me thought it meant as well. And I was sort of pointing out that how do you know that? He hasn't explicitly said that anywhere. Um,
Yeah, no, when I read that, I kind of think that they might mean let's get a broader mix of skin colors involved in the project, and that will make it be faster and more accurate.
yes, so that's also essentially what I think they mean. I think diversity is a bit overloaded for particularly talking about skin color today. And so I'm sure that the author would suggest that lots of other things were important too. Um, but like what the sentence actually says is in increasing the number of decision-making processes, sort of thing. That's the more literal
Well, it doesn't say
interpretation.
that. It says that there is the decision-making process, singular, and we're supposed to increase the diversity within it, but it doesn't say diversity of what dimension.
Um, yeah. So I feel like people often make a meta thing as well in terms of like um or so a decision making like I can create a new singular decision making process by simply having two decision making processes and flipping a coin to choose which one we use, sort of thing. And so like it's unclear whether this is actually like deliberately referring to a singular process that's specific in its own right, or whether there's any context like that as well. But then this is even getting further than I bothered looking at it last time. Um,
Yeah,
so
this one's pretty bad. I also thought the comma was a problem.
um,
Like in general,
it
to allow X by Y, you shouldn't have a comma there.
um, I agree. I think part of the reason is that the actual goal is nothing to do with decision making. It's to do with diversity, diversity of participants and measurable diversity, um, like in a way that they consider important as opposed to like just the number of countries on the list. Um, the countries are only relevant for secondary reasons. You know, if it was all European and North America and Australia, they'd still have an issue with it. But yeah, so there's not just like those errors, uh, but moreover, like just having more ideas in a decision-making process does not make it develop faster or more accurately, or does not make the project develop faster or more accurately. In fact, we'd argue that, or at least I'd argue in general, the opposite is easily demonstrable. Um,
It
so
depends. You can get stuck due to lack of diversity, and like everyone just has the same idea, and you don't have enough alternatives, and when the idea doesn't work well, you have trouble brainstorming anything else. So you need some diversity. But yeah, having many different ideas can bog things down as well.
um, yeah, I'm like thinking about like designs by committee and stuff like that. But if you're trying to execute on one project and the project is highly focused, then my feeling is in general, more cooks are going to make a worse stew or whatever.
Yeah. So we're out of time. Two quick things. For
Yep.
the Yudkowsky stuff, so we analyzed it in more detail and we found some flaws. But I think our first impression was it was pretty decent writing, we could understand it. And so I think that's notable that you do
Mhm.
not have to write perfectly for it to be one, above average, and two, understood by people.
Yep.
So that's standards aren't
There was
super
enough
high. You don't have to be really perfectionist.
there was enough redundancy in that, uh, sort of in the right places to figure out what he was saying.
Yep. Okay, and then so for next time, if possible, I think it would be good to make more progress on the grammar and text analysis, Gumroad stuff, and uh, yeah, see how that goes and what questions you run into and so on.
Yep. Um, yep. No, that'll be good. I've got plenty of video stuff to go with at the start of the stuff, so I'll just keep doing with that, um, until I have questions and then figure it out from there. Okay, cool.
Okay,
All right.
bye.
See you next week.